Today, Michelangelo is known as one of the most famous artists of all time. We all know David and the Sistine Chapel ceiling as staple examples of his masterpieces. But none of his works possess the degree of sorrow, of intimacy, and of silent contemplation as that of his Pietà. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm in the Vatican City. I'm standing just outside St. Peter's Basilica. It is a glorious day today in the city of Rome, although at the same time it's absolutely freezing. So let's go straight inside and take a closer look at Michelangelo's Pietà. This is quite an early work by Michelangelo. It was executed before his David and before the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Michelangelo was just 23 at the time. He had just arrived in Rome from Florence and was looking to make a name for himself as an artist. Michelangelo was commissioned to execute this sculpture by a French cardinal living in Rome. He wanted it as his funeral monument. So this was Michelangelo's first pretty major commission. Little did he know it was to become one of the most celebrated works of art in the entire world. So first things first, let's just establish what we are looking at. This marble sculpture is composed of the dead body of Christ after his crucifixion, supported on the knees of his mother, the Virgin Mary. Christ is outstretched on his back, with his head dramatically thrown back, exposing his vulnerable neck. Mary's left hand is outstretched towards the onlooker, as if she is wordlessly presenting her son to the viewer, as if to say, "And it is so." Her gesture invites us to contemplate Christ's actions and his sacrifice, and by extension, Mary's own sacrifice, the sacrifice of her son, for the good of mankind. Mary's expression is one of contemplation and contained sadness, as opposed to outright distress, and she's encouraging us to similarly silently contemplate the dead body of her son and the implications that come with that. So this sculpture inspires contemplation and compassion. We share Mary's sorrow. The word Pietà actually means pity or compassion. The word itself also denotes a type or subject of art featuring the Virgin Mary supporting the dead body of her son. This subject was very popular in Northern European art, mostly in the form of sculpture, but in Italy it was quite an unprecedented subject, so Michelangelo was breaking boundaries. This work of art is an incredibly intimate and poignant depiction of mother and son. We have Mary sorrowfully overlooking her dead son, whom she cradles in her lap. Mary's right arm supports his shoulder, forcing up his flesh. The way that Christ's shoulder is held up really highlights the limpness of his body, the fact that there is no life left in his body. And yet, Christ does not look like he has just been crucified. He looks incredibly at peace. He almost looks like he is sleeping. His body betrays no explicit stigmata. These are limited to only very small, hardly discernible nail marks and a faint wound in his side. But other than these faint marks, his face betrays no sense of pain or suffering. This, of course, is to point towards Christ's imminent resurrection. Michelangelo didn't want this sculpture to be about Christ's death, but more about the fact that Christ was satisfied and at peace with his sacrifice, knowing that it was for the good of mankind. Now, if you look closely at this sculpture, you might notice that there are a few things that don't quite add up. First of all, Mary looks extremely young. You have to consider that Christ was supposedly 33 years of age when he was crucified, which makes Mary a middle-aged woman. But here she looks even younger than Christ. She barely looks 18. Michelangelo was perfectly capable of sculpting an older face. So why did he choose to render Mary as so? Well, there are a few explanations. Mary's incredible youth could be a way to encapsulate her absolute purity as the Virgin Mary. She has a petite head, a slim neck, and idealized features in order to illustrate an image of absolute sweetness and purity. Michelangelo himself argued that Mary was so pure that she did not age. By the way, the tip of Mary's nose is not original. It was restored not so long ago after an act of vandalism by a man claiming to be Christ. It's an astonishing story, and for a full account of the astounding event, check out the link in the description box below. Mary's youth can also be read in light of the theology of the time, the belief in the Holy Trinity, the idea that Christ is both God's Son and God himself, and thus the Father of all mankind, including Mary herself. So Mary's youth could be a reference to the fact that she is both Christ's mother and son. Michelangelo's understanding of the Holy Trinity came primarily from Dante's Divine Comedy, of which he was a great fan. A third reason can be explained by the fact that Michelangelo, as a high Renaissance artist with a belief in Neoplatonism, loved to carve incredibly idealized and beautiful faces, because he believed that that beauty echoed the divine beauty and perfection of God. Secondly, you might be noticing that Mary is rather large. To give you a sense of scale, Christ's body is life-size, and in comparison, Mary is much bigger than him, particularly if you look at her wide hips. Now, if you really think about it, it is actually impossible for a fully grown man to be cradled in a woman's laps with such ease. So Michelangelo has increased her size for compositional reasons. The two figures together form a pyramidal composition which creates an incredible degree of balance and stability that in turn enhances Mary's protection over Christ. So she's both extremely sweet and pure, as well as unbelievably strong, supportive, and nurturing. If Michelangelo had kept Mary life-size, this stable composition and the sense of support would not have been possible. The whole thing would have looked unsteady, and the sculpture would have lost its sense of grace and balance. Michelangelo has cleverly masked her large size under the heavy folds of drapery that obscure her limbs and disguise the otherwise very wide proportion of her hips. Mary's large size also makes her appear more protecting and nurturing, not only as a mother figure, but also as a representation of the Church. Mary was often seen as Mary Ecclesiae, an encapsulation of the Church, and so here, her size could be espousing the Church as nurturing and supportive, pretty appropriate associations for what was destined to be a cardinal's funeral monument. So the rather strange aspects of the sculpture, which at first may appear a little bit off, can actually be explained in light of the theology of the time and what people wanted to think about when looking at religious art like this. Michelangelo, as the true Renaissance man that he was, dabbled in poetry and in painting as well as other art forms, but he considered himself primarily as a sculptor. And in this sculpture, we can see how he has masterfully commanded the Carrara marble and transformed it into flesh, drapery, and hair. This is astonishing and incredibly naturalistic sculpting. Look at his ribcage pressing against his flesh, the veins that snake their way under the surface of his skin. Christ's face is also astonishing in its intricacy and careful sculpting. The hair is rich and beautifully swept back, and his beard and moustache have been carefully incised. In addition, look at the way that Michelangelo has carved the drapery. His deep carving really makes the folds look natural. These heavy folds are interrupted by a prominent sash that runs along Mary's chest. You'll notice that the sash bears an inscription. This is actually Michelangelo's signature. This is the only work of art that Michelangelo ever signed, and there's a story behind this singular inscription recounted by the artist, writer, and historian Giorgio Vasari. Now, we're not sure how true this story is. Vasari did say a lot of things that were questionable, but it is a story that has been circulating for years. Vasari recounts that after completing his Pietà, Michelangelo overheard someone wrongly attributing it to another artist. At the time, Michelangelo was relatively unknown. He didn't yet have the reputation he was to acquire later on. And so, in a passion of fury, Michelangelo snuck into St. Peter's in the dead of the night and carved his name onto the sash, so that all were to know it was by him and him alone. What he carved was Michelangelo Buonarroti from Florence made this. So there you have it, and I think that story also gives you a sense of Michelangelo's character. Since its completion, the Pietà has silenced and moved countless visitors. As a sculpture, it is startlingly realistic, deeply poignant, and full of significance. Alright, there we go. That is everything for this week's vlog. I really hope you enjoyed learning about Michelangelo's Pietà. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below, as well as what work of art you would like to see from me next. If you learned something new from today's video, give it a like, share it with a friend, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel for similar content. As always, thank you ever so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.